Lies of P is another clone of the Soul series in which you play as Pinocchio, lying, dying and killing crazy robots. And today we will find out if fans or non-fans of From Software games should buy this game. From the first frame you might think for a moment that this is some weird DLC for Bloodborne, but after that moment you realize that it is not. The thing is that stylistically this game is very similar to Bloodborne. Victorian era, abandoned city, but there are robots instead of monsters. The plot of the game is about a town in the Victorian era where people started making puppets, actually robots that started doing all the work for people. But then for some reason the robots went berserk and killed most of people. You play as Pinocchio, the last puppet of the greatest puppeteer Giuseppe. You wake up after this disaster and go to find out what happened. And the first thing to mention is the plot. Unlike other Souls games, the plot here is very easy to understand, and it's presented in a very simple way. And maybe for some people this will be a problem, but for me it's a great news. Finally, I don't have to hire a detective to figure out where the plot is and what it's about. The plot is interesting and made simple enough to understand with dialogue, item descriptions and notes. About the notes I will say that finally they're not as big as in many other games, and I don't have to read them like a little books, which is an advantage of the game. The main difference between Pinocchio and other puppets is that he has a free will, which means that he can lie, which is forbidden by the 4 laws of robotics. That is why in additional missions and in the story you will always be given a choice to lie or to tell the truth. As for example in this additional quest, where a lady asked us to find her child. But it turns out the child is dead, and all we brought was a doll. And since the mother went crazy, we can say that the doll is a child. And here is the question: do we tell the truth that the baby is dead, or do we lie that it is the baby and let her be happy? And to be honest, this mechanic frustrated me, because given the title, given the main character and given the point of the story of Pinocchio, the choice to lie or not to lie should be a very important one. And I thought that when we choose to lie, the gameplay should change, like some debuff appears. But that is not the case. Lying or not lying only affects the ending that you see, and that frustrated me, because you could come up with some interesting gameplay here, like the more you lie, the more damage you do, but your health goes down. Or at least make your nose bigger. It's Pinocchio, especially that the creators are Korean, and you can tell it right away, because this Pinocchio is very cute. And how funny it would be if his nose really got bigger. Imagine yourself at the end of the game running to save people from crazy robots with a meter-long nose. That's a great idea. Developers, contact me. But I can't call it a disadvantage of the game. I would call it a missed opportunity. Since it is a clone of Dark Souls, it is natural that the developers stole almost everything they could from the combat of that series. But of course they change it. On one hand we are waiting for typical Souls gameplay. We appear at the checkpoint, I'll call it a bonfire. We go through the level, kill the enemy and get some resource. I'll call it Souls. We will go to the next bonfire, and if we are successful, we'll save that resource and we can spend it to level up or to buy consumables and new things. Buying and leveling up is very simple, but about leveling up, I would better clarify. We have 6 parameters that we can upgrade, and they affect different things: health, stamina, light weapon attack, heavy weapon attack, elemental resistance and elemental damage, and maximum carry. The difficulty of leveling up is that if we get killed on the way from one campfire to another, we lose all of our souls. We can get them back if we reach the place of death and press the button, but if we get killed again on the way to get the souls, we lose those souls forever. And we can be killed very easily. This is not Assassin's Creed, where you can kill dozens of enemies without any effort. Here you can be killed by any enemy. And as in other games of this genre, you have a strong punch, heavy punch, block, dodge and parry. But in Lies of P there is something that distinguishes its combat from others. Namely, blocking and parrying. The thing is that in this game when you block, you take away part of your health. But the point is that this health becomes transparent red. And if you hit enemies and don't get another damage, we'll restore this piece of health. The main thing is not to miss another hit. We also have a perfect parry, which doesn't take away any health at all. Plus, it increases the level of the enemy's stun, which we will talk about later. And also, if you successfully parry several times in a row, it can break the enemy's weapon, and his attacks will be weaker. And as much as it's an imbalance, it's an incredibly difficult mechanic. It's very hard to get the timing right, because in order to do this perfect parry, you have to press the block button at the exact moment when the enemy is dealing damage. But the problem is not just that the enemy has many different animations and attacks, and not even that they can do the same attacks with different swing speeds. So you can predict the speed of the attack and press the block button either too early or too late. No, the problem is that somehow the game registered this block in a strange way. And I had the impression that if you have two identical blocks from the same boss on the same strike, sometimes this block works and sometimes it doesn't. Which is a mistake by the developers, because parries are not counted correctly. Which leads us to the fact that on the first boss, after 5 minutes of fighting him, you'll be "I hit the f***ing block button! Why the f*** you don't block?" Or I have butterfingers. And then we have the dodge. You might ask why not use it, but the problem is that the dodge here is very short. So when you dodge, the character will bounce to a very short distance. Yes, you can upgrade the skill so you can double dodge, but sometimes even that doesn't help. Especially in boss fights when they hit, for example, a giant sword and you just don't have time to bounce to a sufficient distance. Also, when the enemy lights up red, you can't block or dodge. You just have to parry perfectly. But what I really liked about the combat was the very low number of splash hits. I mean hits where the enemy just stomped his foot or hit the ground and you take damage just because you were standing near the point of impact. I hated this mechanic in the Souls games and Elden Ring, and here there are very few of these hits. So I'm incredibly happy. A huge thank you to the developers. I also like the idea of medkits. The thing is that you only replenish medkits by sitting at a campfire, but sometimes you have to run quite a distance to reach one, and your medkits could be used up. At that moment you can start attacking enemies, and when you fill up the medkit gauge, one medkit is automatically restored to you. Pinocchio also have a left techno arm. You can attach various upgrades to his arm, such as turning it into a flamethrower, a shocker, or a cat hook to attract enemies. He also has a system similar to the one in Sekiro. If you hit an enemy very aggressively, their health bar will eventually turn white. After that you have a few seconds, and if you manage to hit by the heart attack, you will stun the enemy, and then you can approach his vulnerable point and do a lot of damage by pressing just one button. The weapons here are also unusual. The fact that all weapons are divided into blade and hilt, and the blade and the hilt have their own characteristics, as well as special strikes or boost that you can activate by accumulating a special scale. It accumulates as you deal damage to enemies, and the fun part is that the handles and blades can be combined. So you can create your own ideal build by combining different parts of the weapon with different characteristics, speed, damage and skills, which gives you a lot of opportunity to create your own build. Of course, you have a lot of consumables, grenades and power-ups. Even if it'll be very difficult for you to beat the boss, you can always call for a partner under the control of the computer. But this is spent a special item that is knocked out of the enemies. So read advice to be careful, because if you lose and go to the boss again, the partner will also have to call again, spending again the same consumable. Levels here are quite linear, not like in Dark Souls, so you will have to go all the time on the tunnel. Although there are different ways of passage, they will still bring you from point A to point B, so getting off the path will not work. I was also pleased with a little thing like a payphones. Answering them will prompt you to solve a riddle from a particularly disturbing and devious trickster, and you're going to want to get them right, because they earn you Trinity keys that can be used to open Trinity doors containing extremely helpful equipment and materials. There is also some extra quests, like the daughter quest I told you about. And what's nice is that when you're at a bonfire, you can use fast travel and teleport to another bonfire. And when you see the list of campfires, you will see the icons of this additional quest and you will understand where you need to do this quest. But what annoyed me is that you can only level up in the main hub location. So you have to come to the campfire, teleport to this location, then go to a certain character. He'll raise your level. then teleport back to the bonfire where you've been and continue on the game. And I don't understand why they did that. It's just inconvenient. Not only that, in the future you will be able to level up at the bonfire. And I have a question. Why was it so inconvenient at other times? Anyway, Lies of P is a very careful copy of the past Dark Souls. I would say it is the most accurate copy of them, which for me is not bad, because not everyone can copy well. Also, the developers have added new mechanics to the gameplay, which adds variety. So if you're a fan of Souls games, I can well advise you to buy this game. If you're not a fan, then wait for discounts or play on the Game Pass subscription, and maybe you will even like this game.